Hello, fam. Welcome back to the ride here on the Dr. Eric K. Coleman Show. Please, ma'am, please, sir, if you have not share, but most of all, subscribe to the channel so that you will be abreast to all things pertaining to this platform. Today's episode, we are going to be dealing with overcoming fear of intimacy, love, and relationships. And this conversation is going to be anchored by Dr. Jordan Peterson. So let's go ahead and get into the clip, and we will provide commentary along the way.
Hi, Dr. Peterson. I'm a 25-year-old female. I think I'm afraid of intimacy and closeness. The thought of a man taking care of me and having to cede some of my control to create room for that scares me. I want to try and be in a romantic relationship, but I don't know how to allow it. What advice do you have? Okay, well, let's take your questions apart first of all. I think I am afraid of intimacy and closeness. Okay, fair enough. And the first thing I would tell you is that does not make you unique.
Yeah, let's stop there. 25-year-old girl, 25-year-old woman here writing in to Dr. Peterson, saying that she is afraid of intimacy, that she has a fear of relinquishing control to someone else in a relationship. And so let's start with this running definition of what do we define as intimacy. When people say, I'm intimate with someone, in our culture, in our day and age, in our society, we would typically think the number one avenue for this thing called intimacy is sex, which is not the case. Being intimate with someone, I don't mean to be too churchy, but if we take it from a biblical perspective, the word is called yada in Hebrew, and the word yada means to know someone. On an intimate level, meaning that you know the ins and outs of this person. You know them to the point of where you can possibly think and know what their next steps are. You know how they operate. You know how they move. You know what makes them tick. So when we talk about this word intimacy, it's really knowing someone on such a deep level to where they're noticeable. They can point you out. You just don't know of them, but you know them. You know how they think. So let's keep going.
And I'm not saying that in a manner that's designed to be condescending or insulting. I'm just saying that, well, that's a very common fear. You're not alone. You may think you're alone in that, but you definitely aren't. And it's also a justified fear. I mean, if you allow someone to be close to you, then you open yourself up to them and they can hurt and betray you. So, of course, there's reason.
So clearly, as we talk about all the time on this platform, that there are some unresolved issues. There's some unresolved hurts, pains, betrayals, mistrust that has happened in the past that she has not been able to work through, or she has not addressed, to whereas she is still feeling this kind of way, to where she is paralyzed, that she's not able to move forward.
To be afraid. So what do you do about that? Well, there's reason to be afraid of lack of intimacy and distance. You want to be alone for the rest of your life? That's a frightening thought. In all likelihood, it's not that easy to get through life on your own.
Absolutely.
It's lonesome and difficult. And if you're in trouble, you don't have someone to help you out, and you don't have someone to help when they're in trouble, and you don't have anyone to share your triumphs with, and all of that. So that's not good. So you might be afraid of intimacy, but you should be at least as afraid of its lack. And so maybe those fears can balance. You say, well, I'm afraid of intimacy, so I won't go there. Well, you're not afraid enough of being alone. And so you got to bring that up. It's like, yeah, well, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life, assuming you don't. It seems like you don't, because you said, I want to try to be in a romantic relationship. So you want this. And it does look like fear is inhibiting you to some degree, because you're 25, and it sounds from the tone of your question that you haven't been in a relationship before. So it could easily be fear that's stopping you. So
yeah, that's a very good point. Have you been in a relationship before and you've been hurt and you refuse to go down that path again? because you refuse to open yourself up to the potential possibility of hurt. And it's a real thing. That's not something that we can control. But chapter 4 of my book, Paradigm: Thinking Differently About Relationships, we deal with the subject unrealistic expectation. Now, are you thinking, again, I'm just speculating here. I don't know this young lady who wrote in to speak with Dr. Peterson, but are you expecting to be in a relationship and you never experience any type of hurt? You never experience any type of disappointment or pain? That is totally an unrealistic expectation. And so there's some questions, some self-reflective questions that I pose at the end of chapter 4 of the book. And those questions are, do I exhibit the same level of expectation that I require of others? Why do I expect so much from other people? Do I assist others in becoming better to benefit primarily them? Or is it for my personal gain, my personal benefit? I want to see you to become better so that I can benefit from it. Does everything offend me? What is my process in developing new relationships? Do I ask the hard question or just expect people to know? And the last question is, do your expectations of others dwell in reality or fairy tale land? What you're expecting of other people in the relationship, is it fictitious or is it something that people can actually attain? Is it something that you can actually live up to? So I pose those questions in chapter 4 when we talk about unrealistic expectations of other people and potential fears that we have in engaging in relationships, because we think it's supposed to be one way, and if it doesn't pan out the way that we envision it to happen, we don't want to engage anymore. We stop all communication and we withdraw to ourselves because of this fear that has paralyzed us.
Let's talk about trust for a second. You might say, well, why should I trust when I could get hurt? And that's a good question.
It's a very fair question.
You trust when you're naive because you don't know you can get hurt. And that's not ethical. That's not moral. It's not laudable. It's just naivety. Once you know you can be hurt, you trust as a courageous decision.
Yeah.
Knowing that if you trust someone, you can bring out the best in them, and knowing that if you don't, you'll never see it. So it's a calculated.
Yeah, that's going back to the fourth question that, the third question that I just stated. Do I assist others in becoming better or benefit from them, or is it just for myself?
Risk. And it's an intelligent, calculated risk designed to move you and the other person to the best. So you can tell yourself that I'm going to take a risk. I might get hurt, but I'm going to take a risk, knowing it's a risk. It's a reasonable risk. Don't be a fool, but it's a reasonable risk. And remember that you have some reason to be afraid of intimacy and closeness, but you should also see both of those as positives on your side. To be intimate with someone means that you can share your thoughts with them and think things through with them, and you can share your triumphs and your disappointments and all of that. You broaden out your life. You broaden out your ability to solve problems. You increase the probability, all things considered, that you're going to remain sane, because two people who are communicating are generally saner than one person who is only thinking by themselves.
Hey, he said some facts right there. And we talk about this a lot. Have you ever had that one-sided conversation? I know I have, to where you play out the whole scenario and situation in your brain. I'm going to say this, that person's going to say that, or they're going to be this way when I do this. That's a dangerous place to be in. And going into chapter 2 of the book, he brought up another question about when two people come together, them being able to talk to one another and to share emotions, thoughts. And that's where in chapter 2, it talks about a safe place and a safe space for people in relationships to be able to have that type of dialogue.
So So you don't want to deprive yourself of that, even though it's somewhat dangerous to be hooked up with someone. The thought of a man taking care of me and having to cede some of my control to create room for that scares me. Well, you got to think about how you've posed those questions. Cede some of your control. Well, are you sure that's what a relationship is about? Are you sure it's about ceding control? I mean, because there's an idea there that the relationship is going to be based on power.
Yeah. Who has the power in the relationship? I see that so many times. Who runs the relationship, or who wears the pants in the relationship, or who dictates this? Who has the authority? Who is the dominant one and who is the submissive one? It's not necessarily about that, because you're submitting to one another. But quite frankly, in any situation, whether it's job, I use the example of a job. We all are subject matter experts in certain fields and areas on our job. However, at the end of the day, we all, as this young lady used the word cede, we all cede authority to someone else, that if we can't make a decision, then someone has the authority to make the decision on behalf of everyone, entrusting that they are making the best decision for everyone that is involved. So it's just quite funny how we're able to do that on our jobs, but when it comes to relationships, we want to have the complete autonomy, and we want to be the gods of our own lives and control any and everything. And we expect the other people that we're in relationship with to just allow us to have our way and do what we want all the time, and they don't have a say in it. So it's quite selfish to think that you're going to enter into a relationship where I don't want to give up power. I don't want to give up doing what I want to do. I don't want to give up anything, but I expect the other person to just concede to what I want to do. So this is quite interesting.
More you end up with someone and you negotiate with them. And so, where do you want to live? What career do you want to have? Where do you want to be educated? How many children do you want to have? Well, you don't know. Not really. You have your opinions, and maybe you think, I'm going to enforce those. I want that control. But maybe you think instead, well, wouldn't it be good to have the opportunity to discuss all those options with someone reasonable and come to a joint conclusion about what would be best for both of you moving forward? Maybe you could have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. It's not ceding control. And I would say don't cede control. Like, if there are things in your life that you absolutely need, then you want to negotiate for those. But the essence of the relationship should be truthful negotiation, not control and power. And so absolutely. You may be afraid because you have missed.
That's the whole thing. He hit it, accurately there. You should not be entering into a relationship looking for authority and power over someone else. And if you feel as if you do not have the power over someone, then you don't deem it to be a successful relationship, or you just want to move on.
Misapprehension about what an optimal relationship or reasonable relationship would be. The thought of a man taking care of me. Well, what do you mean by that exactly?
Where is she getting her information from? What is her thought process or her running definition concerning the term taking care of me?
Do you feel that you're going to be infantilized because someone is taking care of you, that they're going to want to decide what's best for you?
It's as if she's saying, if I get into a relationship to where a man is taking care of me, then I give up all control. I give up who I am as a person, because this person is providing financially, or providing shelter, protection, comfort for me. It almost seems like there's a fear that she will lose herself as to not having an identity of her own anymore if she decides to, quote unquote, let a man take the lead and cover her and provide for her.
Well, again, there's a power assumption lurking at the bottom of that may not be helpful. To be taken care of means that, someone is going to be looking out for you. And if they think something is good and helpful for you, are going to help you find it and maybe help provide that for you. But you're going to do that with them reciprocally. So you'll be taking care of each other.
Yes.
And that should be a positive thing on both fronts. I know that's idealistic and it's never perfect. And there is power struggles in a relationship, but that doesn't mean that the power dynamic is the basis for the relationship. It sounds to me like you're afraid of being dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And so
again, that's going back to, she didn't address it in the letter, or maybe she does later on, or he's just probably giving us a snippet of it. But, is this something that she observed in her childhood concerning people in her family, that she saw women being dominated over? Is that her perception of relationships, and she just fears that she doesn't want to go down that road?
You need to, I would say one thing that you should really strive to do when you enter a romantic relationship is not to avoid conflict, not to pretend that you're something other than you are, because then you won't cede control and you won't fall prey to a pathological power dynamic. That often happens when people hide themselves because they don't trust, and then they don't get what they want, because how could they? They've never expressed it, and then the other person dominates them because they've never expressed any of their own desires.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's it right there. This goes into productive communication. And then back to chapter 4 of unrealistic expectation. Let me see. What was that question that we asked in chapter 4? Yeah. Question number 6, it says, what is my process in developing relationships? Do I ask the hard questions, or do I just expect people to know? So, I mean, we could spend the rest of the time we have today on this subject, but I find too many times when I'm talking with people and just experiencing my own life, where people don't effectively communicate. They just expect you to know. Like, how did I know that was a trigger? How did I know that upsets you? How did I know that sparks a thought from the past? You never communicated that to me. And, in the past I've had, women that I've dated, they would say, well, if you really paid attention to me, or if you really loved me, or if you really knew me, then you would know. I wouldn't have to say anything. You would just know. No, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it, but that is the dumbest thing. That is the dumbest thought process ever, to expect someone to just know what's in your brain. This isn't X-Men. We are not telepathic. We can't read people's minds. This is reality, people. If it's something that's on your mind, if it's something that bothers you, if it's something that offends you, that gets under your skin, that irks you, be man enough, be woman enough to open your mouth and communicate that to the person that you are in a relationship with. You cannot hold somebody accountable for something that they do not know that they are transgressing. They don't know. So I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing because in my thought, or in that person's thought process, they think it's okay. But you are the one over there boiling inside. And it gets to a point to where you just want to explode. But whose fault really is it? The person who's committing the offense, which they don't even really know that it's an offense, because you have neglected to open your mouth and actually communicate what you're thinking to this person, so that they have the ability, or they have all the information to self-correct and to pivot. I mean, we got to be fair with this thing. We just cannot expect people to know what's inside our brains.
Well, don't do that. Confer with yourself. A very useful marker for that is resentment. You know, if you're in a relationship with someone and you feel resentment climbing up on you, that's an indication of one of two things. You're either immature and unwilling to make the sacrifices necessary for the relationship, or to negotiate fairly within the relationship. And then you should mature out of that as fast as you possibly can. And maybe you can do that through dialogue with your partner. Or the resentment might mean that you are in fact being taken advantage of and that you have something to say. And so don't let, if resentment pops up, find out whether you're immature or being oppressed. And if it's the latter, then you have something to say to enter into a negotiation.
Yes.
And the negotiation should be that you both get something better than either of you would have had if you were separate.
Yeah. There was a show we did a while back, and Dr. Phil was talking about this very subject, about entering into a conversation with someone where it was this power struggle. And he was saying, well, the object of the conversation should not be to win the argument and to at the expense of putting the other person down or belittling or demeaning them. The object of the conversation is to have a mutual understanding, to hear each other out, and to find common ground to move forward. That is the crux of a conversation, not to win the fight, to win the argument, because you had the one up on the other person and you made them feel smaller about themselves. It's how do we come to a mutual understanding, and we hear both sides, we hear both arguments, and we may not agree with one another, but at least we acknowledge the other person's viewpoint and their thought processes, and we come together to figure out how do we move together to come to a common ground of understanding that we are both willing to move forward in an amicable way.
You know, sometimes it's a zero-sum game and only one person can win the negotiation, but that's suboptimal, and it certainly isn't the typical pattern for a good negotiation. So I want to try and be in a romantic relationship, but I don't know how to allow it. Well, the next thing I would say is, well, one step at a time.
Yeah.
You don't have to do this any faster than you want to. So slow it down, you know? So how would a generic relationship start? Well, maybe you meet online. Well, what do you do first? You email each other. Excuse me if I'm out of touch. You email each other. You know, and you talk about trivial things to begin with, just to see if the other person can even talk. And then, you know, you start sharing something. And when you do that, you see if the other person shares something of about equivalent emotional significance. And then maybe you share something deeper and see if they do the same in return. And you test each other out in writing. Maybe you exchange photographs and you see if you're curious and interested. And if you are, well, then maybe you meet for coffee in the middle of the afternoon in a well-lit location where there's lots of other people around. And you check the person out and you have a conversation and you see if you like them and if there's some attraction and if there's some curiosity. And maybe you meet for coffee 3 times because you're not in a hurry.
Yeah.
You know, and then maybe you go to a movie and you see if you decide which movie or if he decides which movie, and whether that can be negotiated about, and whether you respond the same way, and whether you have anything to talk about afterwards. And maybe that's all you do. Maybe you go to a movie 5 times. Like, you don't have to do this any faster than necessary. And so if you're afraid, don't bite off more than you can chew.
And again, you know, he's giving some good advice here, but, you know, I'm just going to go back to my original statement that there's a lot left out of this letter that she wrote in to Dr. Peterson. I'm willing to put money on it, but there is some past trauma here. Or something's not right. Something's not clicking to where she's so afraid to be in a quote unquote intimate relationship, as far as wanting to have a companion, have somebody to share life with on a romantic level. There's a lot that's not being said here, to where she's paralyzed this much, to where she's having this type of fear towards intimacy, towards loving someone or allowing someone to love her. And just this whole idea of engaging in a relationship.
Can adjust the rate at which the relationship progresses. And I would say that to all the women who are listening, is like, slow the hell down. You think that if you don't allow the relationship to proceed sexually, say at a very rapid rate, you're going to lose the interest of the guy. If that's the case, then lose it, because it's not worth it. If he has any sense at all, if you slow things down, and there's anything more there than just mere physical lust, let's say narrow-minded, impulsive physical lust, which is nothing to sneer at, by the way, but is hardly the basis for a good relationship.
I mean, that's good. That's a good talk right there. You know, set the expectation. And I say this all the time here, that, you know, men, we respond to standard. In what we do, we have an option to where are we going to respond to that or not? Either it's yes or no. But again, set the expectation, set the tone. That way the other person justly and fairly knows what the expectation is, and they have the ability to pivot as such. So give the person the opportunity. Just don't expect and not have the conversation. That's where you set yourself up for failure.
If he can't tolerate it slowing down, well, then he's not that interested in you, or he's immature, or so don't worry about that. Slow it down. It's to everyone's advantage to slow it down. So slow it down until you're not afraid. That's part of learning to negotiate with yourself. So get the hell out there and get in the romantic relationship. Try them out, but don't do them quickly, and make sure that you keep your head about you, and that you don't, that you don't allow your cowardice, essentially, to interfere with your ability to express what you want. And you want to question your presupposition that the relationship is necessarily going to be predicated on something like power and control, because that's not a good relationship. That isn't how relationships should function. They're pathological when that's what they're about. And you should be afraid of them if that's what they're about.
So, I mean, that's the end of his commentary, but he is absolutely correct in that regard. So you want to make sure, number one, to his point, that you are slowing down, that you are not doing things haphazardly, that you take your time, you're methodical, you approach it slowly. But then again, you're not having these unrealistic expectations. That you are going into these relationships thinking that people are just supposed to know you. They know your quirks, they know your triggers. That's just not so. That is totally unfair. It's unrealistic. But yeah, you got to do the work on yourself. You got to be able to unpack, why am I approaching this and feeling this way, to think that relationships is all about power, that someone is going to reign over me and dominate me in such a way that I'm going to lose who I am. So fam, that comes to the end of the show today. I hope you enjoyed that. You got something out of it in regards to relationships, overcoming fear of intimacy, love, and relationships. And hopefully, as we continue to do the work on ourselves, we'll be better for our families. We'll be better for our communities, society, this nation, and we can take this thing globally. So until next time, continue to think differently about relationships.